Nobody in that hospital knew the man pushing the supply cart down the third-floor corridor was the one who owned the building. Not the nurses who nodded at him without really seeing him. Not the orderlies who stepped aside to let him pass. Not even Dr. Hargrove, who had shaken hands with Liam Ashford at a charity gala 6 months earlier and called him a visionary for Canadian healthcare. Liam had smiled politely that night in his $3,000 suit, said something forgettable about community investment, and gone home thinking the hospital was running exactly as it should. He'd been wrong. The cart he was pushing now smelled like industrial cleaner and old rubber. The name tag on his chest said Lee. Nobody asked for a last name. Nobody asked anything at all. It had started 3 weeks ago in a boardroom on the 42nd floor of Ashford Capital's office tower in downtown Toronto. His director of operations, a man named Bruce Kellerman, who had the particular talent of making terrible news sound like mild inconvenience, had laid out the quarterly reports for Northgate General Hospital, one of 4 medical facilities Liam's holding company had acquired over the past 5 years. Patient satisfaction scores had dropped for the 3rd consecutive quarter. Staff turnover was at 42%. There had been 2 formal complaints filed against the facility manager, a man named Derek Voss, in the past 8 months. Both dismissed by Voss himself before they reached Liam's desk. "What exactly does the facility manager do all day?" Liam had asked. Bruce had hesitated just long enough to be telling. "He manages the facility." Liam had closed the folder. "I'm going in." Bruce had blinked. "I'm sorry, undercover, entry level. I want to see what's actually happening before we make any decisions about restructuring." He'd already been thinking about it, reading about similar approaches quietly. He didn't tell Bruce that. Set it up. New name, basic background, maintenance support position. 1 month. Bruce had looked at him the way people look at someone who announces they're going to climb a mountain in sandals. But he'd set it up. Bruce was nothing if not efficient. The 3rd floor of Northgate General was a different world from the 42nd floor of anything. The fluorescent light above the supply closet near the East Nursing Station buzzed and flickered every 12 seconds. Liam had counted. The supply closet itself was organized in a way that seemed designed to make every simple task take twice as long. Bedpans stacked in front of the disinfectant spray, cleaning cloths behind the IV stands, nothing labeled. On his first morning, he'd spent 20 minutes looking for the replacement mop heads before a nurse passing by had taken pity on him. "Bottom shelf, behind the blue bin," she'd said without slowing down. Nobody knows why. Derek reorganized it last month, and none of us have figured out his logic. She hadn't introduced herself. She was moving too fast for introductions. He saw her again that afternoon at the nursing station. She was explaining something to an elderly patient who had come up to the desk, looking confused about his discharge paperwork, even though the nursing station technically handled a different department. It wasn't her problem to solve. She solved it anyway, gently, without any visible impatience, digging through the paperwork until she found the right form and walked the man through it line by line. Her name tag said Nadia. No last name visible from where Liam was standing. Mopping the hallway floor with the kind of studied invisibility he was already learning was essential to the job. He learned her full name on the 4th day, when Derek Voss swept through the floor for what the other staff called the inspection, delivered with a particular flatness that indicated it was neither welcome nor particularly inspecting anything useful. Derek was a large man who moved like he was used to having rooms rearrange themselves around him. He wore his facility manager lanyard like a medal, and spoke to the nursing staff with the specific condescension of someone who had once been corrected by a subordinate and had never forgiven the entire category of subordinates since. "Okafor," he said, stopping at the nursing station where Nadia was updating patient files. He didn't say her full name, just the last name, the way a teacher calls roll when they already don't like the answer. "Why is the Henderson file still open? I marked it for discharge review yesterday." Nadia looked up from the screen. She had dark eyes and the kind of stillness that looked like patience, but Liam was beginning to understand was something else entirely. "Mr. Henderson's daughter called this morning to request a 24-hour extension while she arranges transport from Sudbury. I documented it in the notes. I don't read every line of notes, Okafor. I read the status field. The status field says open." "Because the file is open." There was a silence. Derek's jaw moved slightly. Change the status to pending discharge and send me a flag. Don't make me come down here for things you could handle in 30 seconds. I could handle it in 30 seconds, Nadia said. But I'd need those 30 seconds to not be explaining why I already handled it correctly. Liam, pretending to examine a scuff mark on the floor near the wall, felt something shift in his chest. Derek stared at her for a long moment. You've got an attitude problem, Nadia. I've got a documentation problem, she said pleasantly. Completely different thing. I'll send you the flag. Derek left. The two other nurses at the station were very interested in their screens. When the elevator doors closed, one of them, a younger woman whose name tag said Brit, let out a breath. One of these days, Brit said quietly. One of these days, Nadia agreed and went back to the Henderson file. Liam had a rule when he'd started this that he would not get involved. He was there to observe, to gather information, to understand the operational problems from the inside. He was not there to feel things about nurses with sharp answers and careful eyes. The rule lasted about 11 days. On day 11, Derek Voss called a mandatory staff meeting at 7 in the morning, 30 minutes before the day shift officially began, which meant 30 minutes of unpaid time for everyone who showed up, and a formal warning for anyone who didn't. Liam showed up. He stood near the back of the break room, with a paper cup of coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime during a previous shift, and he listened to Derek explain a new efficiency protocol that essentially meant fewer staff would cover the same number of patients during the Tuesday and Thursday evening shifts. This is a resourcing decision made at the ownership level, Derek said. He used that phrase, ownership level, with the authority of someone who assumed no one in the room had ever met anyone at the ownership level. Liam looked down at his paper cup. What about patient safety ratios? Nadia asked from somewhere near the middle of the room. Provincial guidelines recommend a minimum of 1 nurse to every 4 patients during evening shifts. Tuesday evenings were already at the limit. The guidelines are recommendations, not law. They're recommendations we've been following because they're the difference between catching something early and filing an incident report. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. I'd like that in writing, that we're knowingly dropping below recommended ratios for the documentation. The room was very quiet. Derek looked at her with the expression of a man who had just decided something. I'll keep that feedback in mind, Nadia. Nadia Okafor, she said. RN, 3rd floor east. I just want to make sure the documentation is accurate. After the meeting, Liam threw his paper cup in the recycling and stood in the hallway for a long moment thinking about the ownership level and what exactly it had sanctioned without knowing it. He called Bruce Kellerman from the parking garage that evening. I need the last 6 months of staffing decisions for Northgate, he said, specifically anything that went through Voss's office, and I need to know who approved the Thursday evening coverage changes. A pause. Should I ask how things are going at the hospital? The fluorescent light on 3 East has been flickering for at least 2 weeks. That's where I'd start. He hung up and sat in his car in the dark for a while, thinking about a woman who put her full name on record in a room full of people who were pretending not to hear. He first spoke to her, not just the brief functional exchanges of passing in hallways, on day 15. He'd been tasked with clearing out a storage room on the 2nd floor that had apparently been designated temporary about 4 years ago and had since accumulated the particular sediment of institutional neglect. Broken chair parts, outdated equipment manuals, a desktop computer that still had a Windows XP sticker on it. He was halfway through sorting it when Nadia appeared in the doorway with 2 coffees from the cafe downstairs. She held one out to him. He looked at it. I'm fine. Nobody's fine after 3 hours in that room, she said. I walked past earlier and you looked like you were reconsidering your life choices. He took the coffee. It was actual coffee, not the break room version. How'd you know I was still in here? I heard something fall. That was the chair. I know. The chair's been falling off that stack once a week for months. She leaned against the door frame and looked at the room with the resigned assessment of someone who'd been looking at institutional neglect long enough to stop being surprised by it. Nobody's cleaned this out because nobody wants to deal with Derek deciding it means they have free time. Liam looked at her. Do you always say out loud what everyone else is thinking? Someone has to. She shrugged, not unkindly. I've noticed you notice things. The chart holder that's been broken on room 308's door. The fact that the supply closet makes no sense. You've been here 2 weeks and you already know where everything actually is. He hadn't realized he'd been that visible, just trying to do the job right. Most people stop trying to do it right after about day 3, she said, when they realize the system isn't set up to reward that. She studied him for a moment with those careful dark eyes. Where were you before this? Different kind of facilities work, he said, which was technically true. She nodded like she'd decided not to push. Well, don't let Derek see you making progress in here, or he'll add it to your regular rotation. She pushed off the doorframe. I'm Nadia. 3rd floor east, in case you need someone to blame for giving you decent coffee. Lee, he said. She looked at him, just briefly, just a second, with an expression he couldn't quite read. Then she nodded and left, and he stood in the storage room, holding a cup of actual coffee, and feeling approximately 4 different things at once, none of which were on his original list of reasons for being there. Bruce sent the files the next morning. Liam read them at his kitchen table before the 5:30 alarm he'd set to make it to the hospital by 6. The staffing cuts hadn't come from Voss originally. They'd come from a cost reduction memo that had circulated through 3 layers of administration before landing on Voss's desk. And Voss had implemented them without raising a single concern, which was its own answer. 2 formal complaints from nursing staff had been filed in the past year and logged as resolved by Voss with no further action. One of them was about the evening coverage ratios. The name on it was N. Okafor. She'd filed it 7 months ago. Nothing had happened. He put the files down and looked at the window for a while. The thing about Derek Voss, Liam was coming to understand, was not that he was dramatic about his power. He was casual about it. He made small decisions that cost other people large amounts of energy and then went home and didn't think about it. He moved a staff meeting to 7 a.m. and it cost 30 nurses 30 minutes of unpaid time, and he considered the calculation complete. He dismissed a safety complaint and considered the matter resolved because he'd marked it resolved. This was somehow worse than cruelty. Cruelty had heat in it. This was something colder. On day 19, Liam watched Voss tell Nadia, in front of 3 colleagues and a patient's family member who had wandered near the desk, that her interpersonal communication style had been noted in her file. Not that she'd done something wrong, not a specific incident, just that something had been noted. The particular violence of a vague record. Nadia said, very calmly, "Could you tell me specifically what's been noted so I can respond to it in writing?" Voss said he'd have her supervisor send her the details. He didn't say when. He left, and the family member near the desk, an older woman who had been standing there with a get-well card in her hands, looked at Nadia with the expression of someone who had just watched something she couldn't quite name but understood exactly. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked. Nadia smiled at her. "A real one, not a managed one. I'm fine. Can I help you find someone's room?" Liam made a phone call that evening that he'd been drafting in his head for 4 days. He called not Bruce but his legal team. He asked about the process for terminating a facility manager for cause. He asked about the documentation requirements for reversing staffing decisions made below ownership level. He asked, very specifically, about the complaint filed 7 months ago by an RN on the 3rd floor east and why it had never reached him. The answers were what he expected. He wrote them down anyway. On day 23, something happened that Liam had not planned for in any version of this. He was in the stairwell between the 2nd and 3rd floors, eating lunch. The break room was occupied by a mandatory training session that Derek had scheduled for a lunch hour, without providing any replacement lunch. When he heard the door above him open and footsteps pause on the landing, a moment later Nadia sat down on the top step, 2 steps above him, unwrapping a sandwich. She looked down. He looked up. "Storage room refugee?" she asked. "Break room conflict," he said. She nodded. Derek scheduled the CPR recertification over lunch and wouldn't move it because he'd already booked the room. "There's 6 of us eating in stairwells right now." She took a bite of her sandwich. "I know about a secret 3rd option. The roof access door on 4 is unlocked on Tuesdays if you get desperate." Good to know. They ate in a surprisingly comfortable quiet for a few minutes. Outside the narrow stairwell window, the October sky over Toronto was the particular flat gray that meant rain before evening. "Can I ask you something?" Nadia said. "You can try." She looked at him in that way she had. Not unkind, not pushing, just assessing. "You've been here almost a month and you're still noticing things." Still asking questions. You helped the Chowdhury family find their father's room last week, even though it was nowhere near your area. You fixed the chair mount on room 308's door without being asked. A pause. People don't usually do that. Not at this level of, not in a maintenance position. He kept his expression careful. Is that a question? Who are you? She said. Not hostile. Just direct, the way she was direct about everything. The documentation, the ratios, the complaints she filed even when nothing happened. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he made a decision. Not the planned decision, not the one he'd mapped out with Bruce and the legal team for the formal reveal next week. A different one. I'm someone, he said slowly, who should have been paying attention to this place a long time ago and wasn't. She was quiet for a moment, looking at him with something shifting in her expression. That's a strange thing for a maintenance worker to say, she said finally. Yes, he agreed. It is. Another silence, longer this time. The complaint you filed, he said, 7 months ago, about the evening coverage ratios. Her face changed. Not dramatically, just a slight recalibration, a stillness, going careful. How do you know about that? I read it last week. He looked at his hands. It was a good complaint. Documented, specific, tied to provincial guidelines. It should have reached someone. It didn't, and I'm sorry for that. The stairwell was very quiet. Somewhere above them a door opened and closed. Lee, she said. Or whoever you are. Liam, he said. Liam Ashford. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that he had time to notice that she was not looking shocked, not looking angry. She was doing what she always did, which was think. You own this hospital, she said. It wasn't a question. My company does. Yes. And you've been pushing a supply cart for 3 weeks. 23 days. Because the satisfaction scores kept dropping and the staff kept leaving, and I wanted to understand why before I made decisions that affected people's jobs. He paused. And because the man in charge of telling me what was happening was the same man causing the problem. Nadia was quiet. Then, to his complete surprise, she laughed. A short, genuine sound, not bitter. Derek told us last month that Ashford Capital was monitoring performance closely, she said. He seemed to think that meant he was doing something right. He was wrong, I know. She looked at him. What are you going to do? That depends on what the documentation supports. He met her eyes. The complaint you filed, the staffing changes, the coverage ratios. Were you serious about wanting everything in writing? I've been serious about that since day one, she said. I just didn't have anyone to give the writing to who had any authority to do anything with it. You do now, he said. The formal review took 2 weeks after that. Liam stayed on as Lee through the end of the month. Partly because leaving abruptly would have tipped Voss off before the documentation was complete, and partly, he admitted to himself, in the honest early morning hours, because the stairwell on Tuesdays had become a lunch arrangement. They talked about the hospital at first, then about other things. She'd done her nursing degree in Halifax, moved to Toronto for a residency that had turned into a permanent position, sent money home to her mother in Brampton every month, with the cheerful practicality of someone who had always understood that care was an action before it was a feeling. She'd filed 2 complaints and planned to file a 3rd. She'd also, she mentioned once, applied 3 times for a shift lead position that had been given each time to candidates with less experience. Let me guess, he said. The hiring decisions went through Voss's office. Everything goes through Voss's office, she said. That's the problem. The day Derek Voss was called into the administrative office and informed that his employment was being terminated with cause, Liam was not in the building. He'd thought that was cleaner. Bruce sent him a 1-sentence text, done. He was confused about how he knew about the complaints. Liam typed back, good documentation. Then he called Nadia. How are things on 3 East? He asked. A brief silence. Calmer than yesterday, she said. Britt cried a little. Happy tears, I think. A pause. You're not here. I thought it was better that way. It was probably smarter, she said. Though Britt wanted to thank you. She can email Ashford Capital. There's a feedback form. He hesitated. I'm having the light fixture on the east corridor repaired today, and the supply closet is getting a full relabel, and the staffing ratios are going back to recommended minimum starting Monday. I know, she said. We got a memo. The memo wasn't signed by Derek Voss. No, she said, it wasn't. Another pause. Different this time. The shift lead position on 3 East is open again. The one they posted in September. I heard. I'm applying again. You should, he said. The documentation strongly supports your experience. A sound that might have been the beginning of a laugh, quickly controlled. Is that your professional assessment? I've spent a month reading documentation, he said. I think I have a reasonable sense of what good work looks like. The silence that followed was the kind that means more than either person has said. There's a cafe, he said, about 3 blocks from the hospital. Not the one in the lobby. The other one, on Balmoral. I know the one. I've been told the coffee is better there. It is, she said. It's considerably better. I'm going to be in the area on Thursday, he said. Around noon. If you happen to be on a lunch break. Another pause. He was beginning to understand her pauses, the length of them, what they contained. I happen to take lunch at noon on Thursdays, she said. That's good documentation, he said. She laughed, and this time she let it be a real one. On Thursday, Liam Ashford sat at a corner table in the cafe on Balmoral Street and waited, in the particular way of someone who has spent 23 days learning what it is to do a job no one sees, to notice things no one thanks you for, to care about a building full of strangers who have no particular reason to care about you back. Nadia Okafor walked in at 12:04, still in her jacket from outside, cheeks slightly pink from the October cold, and when she saw him she paused in the doorway for exactly 1 second, the same pause she gave everything, the one that meant she was thinking. Then she walked over and sat down across from him, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, like they had been doing this for years, like a man who had spent a month pushing a cart through her hospital had earned the right to sit across a table from her and call it a beginning. You're on time, she said. I was early, he admitted. She looked at him across the small table, coffee menu untouched between them, October light gray and real through the window. Tell me something true, she said. That isn't about the hospital. He thought about it. I've been told, he said, that I have a tendency to manage things from a distance when I should be paying attention up close. He paused. I'm working on that. Nadia Okafor looked at him for a long moment with those careful, assessing eyes that had never once in 23 days been fooled by a name tag. That, she said, sounds like a good place to start.